Should we take another question here? Please say your name. So we have one here, and then one here, and then
because my name is Oliver. I've studied poli-sci here and at Berkeley, so you'll forgive any slant to the question. Very quick preface. You mentioned Iran and you have a possibility of a U.S. attack. Admiral Mike Mullen and others have stated that it's probably not within Israeli capabilities to mount a successful strike with any significant long-term consequences for the Iranian nuclear program, assuming we retain conventional assets only. In other words, the U.S. would probably have to step in if you want a long-term solution. How will the post-November composition of Congress and the White House, of course, affect the chances for an intervention, basically a U.S. massive missile strike or an airstrike on Iran? And to what degree will the difference between either Mitt Romney or Obama winning the presidency affect whether the U.S. chooses to pick up the hot potato Syria, now that Mitt Romney, among other things, has declared Russia the new main enemy of the U.S. in the world?
There's some differences. We don't really know what Romney intends, because the Republicans don't present policies that are identifiable, just rhetoric. Like, you take a look at the economic plan, which is the basic plan. They say, well, we're going to save a lot of money. How? Not a word. What they do, and it's obvious why. What they're intending to do is just destroy everything that's of any help to the general population and enrich their constituency, which is super rich, corporate system and so on. You can't say that, so therefore you don't say anything. In foreign policy, like Iran, the idea is just to say, we're going to run the world, we're going to be tough, we're not going to apologize for anything, everybody's got to be afraid of us. And they might live up to it. If they do, it's very dangerous. I mean, not an enormous difference from the Democrats, but the Democrats are somewhat more nuanced. So I'd expect some difference if Romney wins on a lot of things, but mainly to make everything that's bad awful, But if the Democrats take over, there'll be a continuation of what's going on.
Thank you. All right.
Floyd Rutland. I would like to ask the question of why do you think there's rarely mention in this threat to attack Iran that they're planning to bomb nuclear refineries and nuclear reactors? Humans have never done that. Usually when reactors merely leak, as at Chernobyl or Fukushima, it's a catastrophe. To intentionally blow them open and break refinery seems to be a kind of suicide, considering that the Persian Gulf has 50% of the world's energy reserves. And we're going to plan to permanently contaminate it with radiation. How do you think that why is it there no one is ever mentioning that the attack on Iran is a plan to blow open nuclear reactors and nuclear refineries?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
So the question is, when there's leakage from a nuclear facility, like
if they bombed the reactors.
Yeah, so if they bomb, they would be bombing the reactors directly, which would cause massive pollution. So.
Well, that's a technical problem that guys in the Pentagon work out. I suppose I'm not privy to these discussions. My speculations are as bad as yours, but I assume they believe that if they decide to attack, they can destroy enough of Iran so that there won't be too much damage to their own interests. Could happen, might not happen. These plans often go awry, but I can't judge. It takes technical expertise that I don't have.
Thank you. Okay, the microphone is up here. There are two guys who've been waving at me. We're going to take a question from both of them, and then you can do a tandem operation here. Please say your name and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Thomas. My question is, how do you think the economic problems and economic situations in the United States with the deficit and the problem of keeping military expenses up will affect the Middle East and American foreign policy?
So how about the economic system in the United States with the deficits and keeping the military up? Well, first of all, the deficits are not a serious economic problem. That's business propaganda. The United States can live with deficits much bigger than this for a long time without any serious problems. I think the same is true in Europe. The banks and the financial institutions don't like deficits. As far as the population is concerned, the issue is not the deficit, which is manageable, but joblessness. That's the issue overwhelmingly. But you take a look at what happens in Congress, what's discussed in the media and so on, it's the deficit, because that bothers the financial institutions and doesn't matter what the population wants. The deficit is substantial, but the U.S. is in a position where it can print money indefinitely, runs its own currency, very powerful, can print as much money as it wants. It could conceivably be a potential threat of inflation, but inflation isn't much of a threat if it's low level. Inflation is a problem for the lenders. It's good for the borrowers because the cost of repaying your debt goes down. So the lenders don't like the threat of inflation, but it really doesn't exist, or in the EU either. I mean, the threat is deflation. You take a look at markets understand this. The intellectuals and the politicians tend not to understand it, but the markets understand it fine. They are buying U.S. Treasury securities at practically valueless, no interest. And they do it because they are confident in the security of the economy. That's the market's judgment. It's the judgment of most serious economists. But it doesn't happen to be what the financial institutions want. So, incidentally, about the deficit, the U.S. deficit could be reduced to zero by a very simple mechanism, namely adopting the healthcare programs of other industrial countries. That's not exactly utopian, but the U.S. healthcare system, which is mostly privatized and largely unregulated, is extremely inefficient and very costly. It's about twice the per capita costs of comparable countries and relatively poor outcomes. So if the U.S. were to shift to the kind of healthcare program that every industrial country has in one form or another, that would wipe out the deficit. In fact, over time there'd be a surplus. But you can't talk about that because the financial institutions and the insurance companies are just too powerful. They want to keep it this way. So if you're concerned with the deficit, that's one way to get rid of it. Of course, you could cut back this enormous military spending, but it's just not a major problem. And incidentally, I think the same is true of Europe. The European Central Bank could also essentially print money without end and have stimulus programs which would reinstitute growth and over time pay the deficits, which aren't huge. They're substantial, but not huge. In the long term, there's a debt problem. That's different from deficits. Over a long term, there could be a problem of growing debt. In the United States, the debt is easily traceable. When Ronald Reagan came in, the U.S. was the world's leading creditor. By the time he left, it was the world's leading debtor. The Republican policies are fiscally totally irresponsible. Just spend as much as you like and don't worry about the outcome. It'll somehow work out. During the Clinton years, it was kind of addressed to some extent. When Bush came in, the debt just ballooned again. If Romney comes along, it'll be the same thing. The military spending, the nanny state for the rich, which is quite expensive, the debt will go up again. But that's a long-term problem. The immediate problem is joblessness in Europe too. That's what harms people. It harms just pure economic grounds for getting any human issue. That's what harms the economy and prevents the kind of growth that would ultimately get rid of whatever the debt and deficit problems are. So I think these are political problems. They're not really economic problems.
Great, thanks. Okay, we're going to have one here, and then we're going to have a young man over here, and then I would like to hear from the women